Hello and welcome everyone to Mitchell Giddings Fine Arts. Thank you for choosing to be here this evening and for supporting Michele Ratté and all of our exceptional artists. And before I finish with my introduction, Petey has asked me to read something which we feel is fairly apropos of the times, and it's a small word by poet Kenneth Rexroth. And here it is. Against the ruin of the world, there is only one defense, the creative act. So artists and people who are here tonight, people who look, people who think, and people who seek, this is for all of us. Thank you. We're in for a treat tonight because it isn't often we meet a printmaker whose search for a visual artistic expression leads her down so many paths and through such a myriad of found or carefully handcrafted materials. This isn't to say other artists don't visit these arenas, but Michele's exploration seems different. She really is equal parts scientist and fine artist, able to create unique images which, abstract and highly personal as they are, feel like they're photos or copies or exact renderings of observed objects which have existed for eons, reflecting her study and fascination with geology and underwater life, available and familiar to us all. Also, and obviously, gold is an enormous part of Michele's presentation. Her artist side insists on the permanence, preciousness, and reflective qualities of gold. And scientist Michele invented and patented, along with fellow printmaker Joan Morris, a method to bond metal to substrate, opening up and expanding her interpretive printmaking possibilities. Michele will enlighten you with her stories and techniques, but just know how honored Mitchell Giddings is to present to you this stunning body of work. Please welcome artist Michele Ratté.
Thank you so much. First, I would like to thank Patria Mitchell and Jim Giddings for their generous welcoming of and excellent placement and lighting of my work. It is a pleasure to work with you as well as your staff. I would also like to thank all of you for coming this evening. It is an honor to share this work with interested, engaged viewers. Some of you have come quite a distance to be here, so thank you for that also. About a week and a half ago, as I was beginning to prepare this talk, I felt a striking blankness come over me. In my experience, the world felt like it tilted suddenly toward darkness, and I was stunned into preferring listening to talking. I was drawn also to my studio, where I went to work among my collected objects, books, poems, friends' messages, and years of gathered photos and art images. I remembered that it is a privilege to be an artist, and it is also a way of being engaged with the world, of reaching beyond the concerns of the moment, and of forging a way to make a contribution. Something essential was restored when I remembered all of that. Also, I began drilling many tiny holes through a little yellow carved wooden bird. I would like to draw your attention to the title of my show, Flower of Time, Affinities. Flower of Time comes from the name of a song by Gilles Vigneault called La Fleur du Temps, which translates roughly to blossom time or flower of time. The lyrics are infused with dreamy but potent imagery regarding the fleetness and preciousness of time, the futility of outrunning our fate, and specifically speak of a flower pushing against the bottom of a foot. So this is one interpretation of my title. A further relevance has to do with how I make much of my work, or that is, how much of my work demands of me in the making, a lot of time. Artist Anne Hamilton refers to, quote, time itself as a process and a material, unquote, when speaking of her working methods. This is true of my work also. In order to achieve certain results, it has been necessary to enter into a wholly committed relationship with time. The inventing of a printmaking method for gilding with precious metals took many years of devoted trial and error. The weaving of stainless steel wire forms, the shaping and sewing of sculptural elements, all of those working methods take a lot of time. But the rewards are this kind of deeply nuanced fruition. To begin to illuminate the word affinities, I turn to poet Mary Oliver. This is taken from her new book of essays called Upstream. And I'm quoting her. Do you think there is anything not attached by its unbreakable cord to everything else? I would say that there exist 1,000 unbreakable links between each of us and everything else, and that our dignity and our chances are one. When affinities form between things, they sometimes share a border, they often merge. This show is a gathering of related and interrelated works, many of which share borders or fundamental elements. As you look around you, you will notice repeated themes and materials. You will notice themes and imagery that crisscross from one medium to another. All of the works have their place in and of themselves, but also in relation to the whole. The sculpture informs the etchings. The collage shares elements with the sculpture. And you may wonder how some of these objects came about. Many of the sculptural works began with a found object that suggested a direction or sparked an idea. Much of what I make in that way evolves as I'm making it with very little foreplanning. The thing literally grows over time as I work on it to completion. And often it is only after I recognize that the thing is complete and I get some perspective that I see what it may be. It occurs to me in retrospect. There is a lot of uncertainty in this kind of not knowing process, but I have learned to trust it. For instance, bell jar, which is this piece right here. Several years ago, I made the anemone forms you see suspended inside the wire bell. They were begun in Costa Rica using materials I had brought along, combined with local shells. To me, they are a tribute to the fragility of and the glory of the flora and fauna of that place. They sat in my studio for some time, not knowing what they would become. Then I found a jumble of stainless steel fishing line washed up on the beach in Provincetown, and I taught myself how to weave with it so that I could form a sort of stem for the anemones. And in the making of that, I discovered the desire to place the whole stem and anemones inside what I see as a protective wire framework. And if you look at these etchings next to bell jar, right here on the wall, you may notice they are related to it because of the woven wire aspect, and they are interrelated with the piece here called Ocean Flower, which is on a pedestal right next to them. As I was weaving these sculptures, I took photographs along the way because beautiful things were happening and they were changing daily. And I wanted to capture some of the moments along the way. So this print here in 3 different stages is called Zoon, Z-O-O-N, which means animal. And it's an image of the stem of Ocean Flower, which is that sculpture right there. It's also its own thing, Zoon, but that's the relationship. Many viewers have asked me about the Vernal Heart series, which is the 5 pieces right here behind me. These began as an ink drawing. I had found an X-ray photograph of a human heart at a time recently when I was experiencing a sense of dispossession. I had moved away from the ocean to come here to Vermont, and this heart image really struck me. The drawing took much time and was a passage of discovery, very much like a map that I followed inside to a more rooted place. These are precious metal monoprints that I made from scaling up the drawing and printing with the gold printing process used elsewhere in the show. This one is hand painted with a river after gold printing, and this one is screen printed with a root after printing. You'll have questions about how I do the gilding process, most likely. I can tell you that it is a proprietary printing process that is part photographic, and I invented it with a partner and was awarded a patent for it in 2006. And I can't tell you how it is done, in other words. My inventing partner and I are the two people who can use it in our work. I have a short handout about it here if anyone would like it. I have many of them, and it's also on the wall over there if you want to read more about it. And you can ask questions. It's just that if you probe too much, I'll have to just say no. I attribute my fascination with stones, metals, especially gold, and natural forms to being a geologist's daughter. The deserts of Arizona and Utah were my first home. They were places of vast, marvelous natural beauty, Native American cultures, otherworldly plant life, and venomous creatures. We explored the terrain in Dad's Jeep, collecting mica, fool's gold, fossils, and rocks. I learned many things on those field trips, not the least of which is that life on our earth is boundlessly complex, precarious, and precious beyond measure. I also learned that the desert of southwestern North America was previously a sea many times. So I consider that I first fell in love with the ocean in the desert. The handmade object and the activity of making something was central to our home life. Mom comes from generations of women and men who tied flies, fished, hunted, and made their own clothes. Her life was spent before marrying on Puget Sound in Washington State and on the coast of Alaska. So those marine environments entered my awareness through her many stories of life there. That's all I've written. So I'd like to open it up to a discussion, questions, because I know people have questions and I don't want to keep talking at you. So.
Hey, Michelle.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Okay.
Can you explain again how you got the lines on this piece here?
Sure.
Because I kind of remember, but I want to be reminded because I love it.
Thank you. This piece here, which I call Sacred Cove, is the last piece I made before leaving Martha's Vineyard, which was my home for almost 30 years. And I had a studio there where I used to walk down to the beach every day. I was really a lucky person. And so when I knew I was leaving, several weeks before we left, I decided I would record the marks that the ocean made on the sand in my one favorite spot where I used to go sit. So that was hard to figure out how am I going to do that, but I figured out that if I took a piece of thick plastic, clear plastic, and I took a marker, a permanent marker that would show up on it, and I marked with sticks the very highest point of where the wavelets came in every night, I could actually go lay that down every day at a certain time and just mark what the wavelets had done on the sand. They make an impression at the highest point every day. So the drawing is not mine. The drawing is of a very, very special place that I used to go visit. And so I took that, which became a drawing which was clear with black lines, and I printed it onto this piece here. So the lines themselves are left out of the gold. So if you walk around it, what you'll see, especially from the back side, is that there are multitudinous lines piercing through the object here. So, yeah. Yeah. Anybody else? Happy to talk about any of this work.
Where were you born?
Tucson, Arizona. Yeah. And I spent my first 10 years out in Arizona and Utah, and then my dad is from Brattleboro. We moved back here, and I grew up in Brattleboro until I went off to college, and then I left and went to Martha's Vineyard, and then about 8 years ago I moved back to Saxton's River. So, yeah. Jim?
Can you talk about the piece on the upper left of the title wall? It has a lot of stitching, hand stitching in it, and I'm particularly taken by that element of involvement.
Sure. I made that piece and the one underneath it are the most recent things in the show. And I made it in Tuscany back in September. I brought things with me to work on there, so I had an idea of what I wanted to do with that compositionally and some of the elements, but I didn't really know how I would attach things and make them, into one piece. And I do love to stitch things, and so I was considering doing some gluing and things like that because I hadn't brought any thread with me. And I discovered that there was a thread box at the villa where we were staying that someone had made out of olive wood, and when I opened it, it had the most incredible colors in it. And so I ended up sitting and stitching with someone else's thread, which I'm sorry I couldn't replenish, but anyway. So, and then once I was done with that, I took the piece. I actually didn't take the piece with me. I took a picture of the piece into Florence and found a piece of beautiful handmade paper that was just the right color to pop behind it. So it's called Seedling Temple, and I named it in Italian. So I can't remember what it's called in Italian. Piantino Tempio, I think. Piantina Tempio. So, in honor of that. Yeah. Yeah.
I have a question about your studio practice, because you're doing so many different things. Do you focus on one body of work at a time, like a print series, and just do that, or are you doing like multiple things simultaneously, doing sculpture and doing these prints and doing those prints? And I'm curious about the way you work and how you get all those things done.
I have a lot of things going at one time, usually, but I'm not consistent. For instance, the etchings I made all in one go, pretty much for 2 months, because I had these 2 shows coming up and I really wanted to have them done for it. But for the most part, I've got, things in my studio that will be there for even up to years when until it's the right moment for them, like this piece here, that it all comes together and makes sense to me. And then I'm always drawing. I'm drawing a lot all the time in my sketchbook or figure drawing group or something like that. So I usually have that going on also. But I have things around in the studio that I'm sort of tinkering with all the time and out, so I can look at them or walk by them, or, with the collage in the last year, I have many collages started that didn't make it into the show because they weren't finished, but I'll be looking at them almost daily, as I go by, and it'll just occur to me what it needs or whatever. So I think I've got a lot of different things going on at one time, and then when I need to really buckle down and finish something, or I really want to, then I focus on that entirely. Some of these wire sculptures take hundreds of hours to make. And so once I get into it, I actually love the rhythm of going out to the studio. I'll listen to a book on tape or something like that, or some piece of music, and it's very meditative. So I can really get somewhere, And I like to see the progress. Yeah. Does that answer your question, Tim?
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
I also want to say how much I like your how you install the pieces and how well they're shown here.
That's Jim and Petey.
But I've seen your I think that's true. But I've seen
incredible.
Your work in different places, and there's always a lot of sensitivity to how the work is displayed, and a lot of care taken. I can see, and
Thank you.
how it's shown. Really,
Thank you.
Yeah.
I dropped the work off here and then came in and was very pleasantly surprised. You know, it was really great to come in and see what they had, the magic they had created here. Yeah. Yeah.
Explain the process of the two. I think there are prints on this wall next.
Yeah, sure. Those are also from the Heart series that these are from. In other words, they're taken from the ink. I did an ink drawing first and then scaled it. In other words, I made, for this, I think they're about the same size as the ink drawing. But those are etchings. And they're made with what's called solar plate, which means it's a new technology. Instead of taking an etching plate and drawing through wax and then putting it in acid, it's actually a photographic method. The plate is covered with a photographic plastic. And so you can take your own drawing or your own, whatever your artwork is, on clear plastic, basically your drawing is, or whatever it is, on clear, it's a black drawing. You put it over the top of this photographically sensitized plate, you expose it to light, and the light will harden in all the places where the black is not. And then you put it into water and you brush it, and you get these incredible, you know, what you usually get out of an etching plate, which is something that will hold ink. So you get grooves and marks and all kinds of rough things. So that's how I made that plate. And on the left, it was printed with Prussian blue ink. And on the right, it's the second print of the same plate. It had so much beautiful ink left on it that I thought, oh, I wonder what it'll look like if I take it and surface roll it with this, you know, lovely coral color, pale coral color, and then print it. And it was surprising. It was wonderful to see what happened, you know. So. Also, I think the one on the left has something called chine collé, which is a way of printmaking where you take a piece of rice paper or Japanese mulberry paper and you put it, here's your original printmaking paper, here's your rice paper with adhesive on the back of it, usually rice paste, and then you put your inked plate on top of that and you run it through the press, and so you get all those layers in one. And many of the prints in this show are done that way with hand color. I did a lot of hand coloring on the Japanese paper. So you'll see, a particular favorite of mine is what happens to the edges of that paper that go beyond the edge of where the print is. So you can see, look around and just look at edges. You know, they're kind of beautiful. Lori.
Can you talk about the hand-embroidered lacy gold pieces on the wall over on the far side?
Sure, yeah. Those are printed from baby collars that were lace, and then, you know, cut out and then hand embroidered with two different things that I found on gravestones that I thought were beautiful. One says "Give light," and the other one says "Come, triumphant spirit." And they somehow were paired for me. And the fact that they're children's bibs, basically. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Garrett.
Can you talk a little bit about the gold? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, just in the relationship between found objects and gold, one doesn't tend to find gold.
Yeah, there's a pretty big reach there. Other people might be able to talk about it better than I can about myself, honestly. I find there are so many beautiful things in the world that I find just looking around every day. And so the found objects are just because they become I can't not pick them up. They're so beautiful. And then they inspire me to work with them, you know, and I work with them, and then things happen, and, you know, over time stuff develops. In terms of the gold, I really love reflective and light emanating and light producing things. And light is a big element in my work, I think. I think about it a lot, you know, whether the light goes through something, whether it reflects off of something. So the gold is not just about gold, it's really about light. And it's untarnishing, which is very important to me. It's kind of everlasting quality, but also it's a tone, it's a color. So it's not, I really like having a full range of materials to work with. I find that if I worked entirely in gold, it might just get to be too much gold. So I like to combine really like experienced materials with something as seemingly fragile and high ethereal as gold. I find the range to be interesting, and there's a certain tension in it, which makes it more alive, I believe. I like the fact that a plastic beach rope thread can sit with gold and somehow make sense. Or that in this same piece, I've also printed with sand from that same beach. So, you know, it's a mineral grain, it's a rough, rugged material, but anyway, that's how I think about it. Yeah. But you might have other feelings about it, you know, and I hope that people will respond in their own personal way to the stones, the shells, the bells in that piece over there, which are made from exploded bomb casings in Cambodia by people who, you know, collected the bomb casings and then wanted to do something extremely positive and life-giving with them. And, you know, it's a transformative object. So I'm hoping that, you know, somehow people will really engage with the work and find their own personal reasons why the gold might be interesting, you know, to them in combination. Rick?
I'm a little fascinated with your process that you've patented.
Yeah.
I know I won't find out how it's done, but
you could actually look it up.
Yeah.
Patents are in the public domain, and you can read how we do it. Because I have an inventing partner, I can't really talk about it like, you know, line by line, this is how we do it. It just doesn't, it's not.
Right. So my question is not about how it's done. It's what led you and your partner to patent it. I mean, it was a concern that applications might come out of that for evil, or was it simply just?
That is a very interesting question, actually. You wouldn't believe what happened. The reason we patented it was because we wanted some control over what happened with it. Exactly that. And also because it looked at one point for a brief shining moment like there might be some application in some field like fashion, or, you know, where we could make back the money that we spent for years trying to pay lawyers to do this stuff for us. But one of the eeriest episodes in the whole thing was that we were invited to meet with DARPA because they were developing, to me this is eerie, other people might disagree, but DARPA is the branch of the US military that develops new ways of figuring out how to, in this case, do surveillance. They wanted to know if our process could be printed in such a way that it would be a flexible way of transmitting an electrical charge.
Wearable circuitry.
Yeah, circuitry, yeah. So,
a jacket that was full of electronic circuitry that
Yeah.
was printed right into the fabric, and it would
or
become-
towels, they said, in a hotel room, for instance. So we decided that there was maybe a good reason to try to keep some control over what happened to our process. Nothing came of that, luckily, that I know of. So, and we haven't made a lot of money on it. Garrett, did you have a question?
No, I was just wondering, like, maybe like 10 years ago, it's my guesstimate, I'm terrible at time, but a lot of your work refused to go on a wall and suddenly became more three-dimensional, eventually becoming more even, kind of like installations. I was wondering what sort of pushed you toward, what happened that pushed you toward things that refused, basically sculpture.
Yeah. That is such a good question. I think for a long time I had all these beautiful things in my studio that I wanted to work with that I couldn't figure out how to work with and not have it look like a craft project. And I mean, really, truly, it's like, oh no. Not that there's anything wrong with craft, but I was working in a different vein, and I really felt like I have to just leave that stuff there until I figure out what it's there for. When the gold process showed me that it could be shapeable on certain substrates, like this incredible woven silk from Japan, what I use, like this silk right here, and the silk in the anemones, and the silk in this sea pelt piece, and this silk right here, it is shapeable with the gold on it, and so it will hold a form. And so when I realized that this thing could hold a form, and that I could actually use it to trap some of these objects and hold them in space, then I got really fascinated by it. And I think that's when I sort of took off with the idea of sculpture or three-dimensional work. I have to say that it's really fun now to be working with etching because it's work for the wall again. I used to do, Garrett and Alex know my work for a long, long time, and they know the trajectory of maybe 30 or 40 years of, 30 years of work, 35. Anyway, I was working in collage a lot in my 30s and 40s, and so it is a departure. But it's fun to work in collage again, too, so I feel like I'm kind of coming back to that, but I think now I'm probably going to be working in all different ways, it's fun.
What form is the gold when you take it out and start using it?
Yeah, it's gold leaf that I get on a roll with paper backing. It's called patent leaf, and it's got a wax paper backing, and it's about 66 feet long by 4 inches wide. So you unroll it, and the thing is I can't handle gold leaf without the backing. I've tried. It goes everywhere. It weighs nothing. But with the wax paper backing on it, you can place it exactly where you want it. And then once it has adhered, you just take that paper off, and there it is. Yeah.
And how do you adhere it to whatever it is you're putting, like you have it here, you have it on so many of your sculptures?
That would be my patented process that I can't talk about. I just made my gallerist really mad at me. Yes?
How much does that roll cost?
That roll costs about, well, depending on the price of gold whenever you buy it, which changes, anywhere from $700 to $1,200. Yeah. Yeah. It's a commitment.
Yeah.
And some of it goes down the drain.
That's my husband. Petey.
I know I'm bringing everybody down this direction again.
Yeah.
I'm really curious about the creation of Pellegrin. 'Cause
good.
it's got some really neat stories around it, so.
Yeah.
I know it's kind of hard to get to it, but.
Okay. Does anybody want to walk over to Pellegrin, which is the one in the corner right there? So I'm going to talk about this piece right here, which is it's beautifully displayed because Petey, I wasn't even going to put it in this direction. I think it looks great. I'm so happy she did this. But anyway, when I was traveling over here with it, the sculpture kind of cocked off to the side in the car. It's much better that way. Anyway, I did a Dune Shack residency in Provincetown a few years ago, which was heaven on earth. And while there, I got to walk on this long beach called Race Point every day. My shack was perched up above the ocean, and it was October, and there was nobody around. So I found incredible things on the beach. This I found on the beach. It is, well, the part of it that this is all attached to is a leather sole of a woman's boot. It's actually, you can't necessarily tell, but it's extremely small and very, very delicate and very narrow. And I have a friend who is a cobbler, and I took it to him. He's Italian and he's elderly and he's been around a long time doing shoe work. And he says that it could be very old. Could be very old because he hadn't seen a boot that was sewn this way, ever. So anyway, I started to imagine that perhaps it was even from the shoe of a shipwrecked woman or child or a pilgrim, being where I was. And I started thinking about it being under the water and what that would look like. And so I covered the top surface of it with gold because, when you're looking at something that's down there submerged underwater, like even a fish that's moving or an object, the light flashes on it and it's magical looking. So I created the magical surface with the gold, and then I took beach rope, teased it apart, and put it, through all the pierced parts of not all of them. There are some holes left open because I thought that was beautiful too, to be able to see through it. So that's what's going on there. And if you look at the back side of this, it's a piece of leather, of course, and the back side is incredibly beat up, beautifully beat up. It's got all kinds of lines and grooves in it and things like that. So I'm not sure what else to say about it, really, except that it's I don't know, it's like a magical object from underneath the ocean that who knows how long it was there before I found it, really, or what its history was before I found it. And now it has this whole new life as a sculpture. It's kind of interesting.
Michelle, question. Did you alter the shape of it?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, it was warped like that, and it's very hard, actually. It's very hardened, yeah.
Are those beads part of the sole that you found, or
no? The beads are glass beads, and when I push the C thread through, I can make it very small on the back side and push a bead onto it, and then the bead actually anchors it on the back side. So the beads are anchors.
And you didn't have to glue them or anything? Did you have
Well,
to...
if you look at them, you'll see that actually they are, I took a lighter and melted them. So the C rope is melted right into the bead. Didn't really need any gluing because they come up through and then they spread, so they defy gravity.
The beads look like eyes.
They do. Anything else? Yeah.
I have a question about this etching process in these three and these over here.
Yeah.
Did you create the objects that are
Yes, that
the
is such a
images
good
there?
question. I need to make that more clear. As I was weaving these sculptures, bell jar, ocean flower, and this new one here, flot, which is more subtle, so you will have to come and look at it more closely. It's really quite subtle. But as I was weaving them, they were beautiful. So I loved them, but I knew they were going to change. And so I just started taking photographs of them. I had no plans for the photographs. But when I started doing solar etching last winter, I realized when I was looking through my photographs that they were beautiful images just in and of themselves, yeah. And so I took the photographs and I worked back into them with, ink, because I do a lot of ink drawing, and made, them very black in places and things like that, and then put them onto those plates. So the etchings are all completely related to the sculpture. Hopefully they also hold their own as images, but that's how I got the images. So the ones over on that wall there are all bell jar, or originally part of either the core, the stem, or the bell, the skirt. Zune on that back wall there is the stem, really, for ocean flower, which is right there by Margaret. And then these here are the beginning part when I first just started weaving the wire onto the chum bag that's right there. Yeah. Yeah.
Is there any object that you found in your experience that the gold leaf will not adhere to? Or it just will adhere to anything?
Oh, I'm sure there's something, but I don't know what it is because I usually figure out a way. No. No. I think if I wanted to put it on, let's say, plastic even, I could figure it out because they make plastic glues now and things like that. So, in a case like this, I can glue it to leather with PVA glue. It's not a big surprise. People do use gold in their work just by gluing it too. This is very different. It's just an application of gold leaf. Very different from the printmaking with gold leaf. Yeah. But no, I haven't found anything it won't adhere to, really. Petey?
Would this be good timing because people are on this side for you to talk about flot and sea pelt?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. What would you like to know about them? Everything. Okay, so flot, once again, dune shack residency, and I found a lot of beautiful things on the beach, and I was very taken with this extremely bleached out and pale, but totally intact chum bag.
Does everybody know what a chum bag is?
No. Okay. A chum bag is what fishermen put their bait in for lobstering, or they drop it down into the ocean, and then it attracts whatever they're trying to catch, and a lot of times other things too. So,
what's it made of?
Plastic.
It's like poly.
Yeah, it's just plastic. Hi, Paul.
Weird green.
So anyway, I took it and it was pretty rigid, but then I made it even more rigid by wrapping it with this beautiful pink wire and getting it to really stay in its shape. And then I also hung a piece of, I don't know why I did it, don't ask me, but it worked. It did what I wanted, which was this central sort of floating string. So there's a piece of hemp string there that's dyed indigo at the bottom that dangles down through the middle. And then the stainless steel fishing line is the same fishing line. I've got lots of jumbles of this fishing line that I found on the beach that's all, been tossed by the sea. So if you look at this, it's basically just a gentle floating, I don't know what, ocean creature, some kind. Sea pelt behind Paul is You know, I don't usually name my things what they are, but this just looked like, to me, a piece of some kind of outer skin of some kind of a sea creature. You know, maybe a fish, maybe not. But I had, you know, being that I love collage, I had pieces left over from something, and I was just playing with them on my table. So that's how the basic shape got made, from all sorts of different pieces sewn together. And then, once again, using beach rope, teasing it apart, tufting it, pushing it through to the back, and then you'll look on the back side, you can see that there are all these turquoise and green glass beads holding it in place. So it's hanging out pretty far so that you can enjoy looking through it, because all these points of light are quite beautiful. So, yeah.
The wall mount's very beautiful too. It does a wonderful job with the brittle hearts.
All the metal wall mounts and the hook that is for bell jar are made by this wonderful sculptor friend, Mark Goodenough. He's really something, and he's great to work with. So, yeah.
Can I ask a question about that? Do you go back and forth with him and to come up with a design for, like, example, that hanging thing there, or does he kind of say, hey, try this, check this out?
Oh yeah, yeah. We do a lot of back and forth, and he'll make me models, and I'll make a little model, and we'll hang it, and we'll light it. And that one in particular was made for the show at the Brattleboro Museum last spring, where the other place I showed bell jar, and we needed something that would reach out into the room far enough that people could get all the way around it, even in a wheelchair. So Mark came up with this idea. Yeah, but he's just great that way, and he's got such a sensibility himself for aesthetics that we're very well matched that way. Yeah.
Michelle, the pieces upstairs in the window,
Yeah.
they're very different, and I just wonder if you could say something about...
I only have one piece in the window, actually, the one that's right under my name. Is it very different? I don't know if it's very different, is it? It's flat work, and the color, yeah. So I call it Dangerous Flower. I don't know if it's different. I guess it's different. It's something I made that I really know it's right, and I know it's what I want to do and all of that, so I don't really know how to even explain. You know, quite often, when I'm working, I don't worry about whether things relate to each other from one piece to the next, ever. I'm really spoiled that way. I just do what I want to do, kind of. And after a while, there will emerge maybe several pieces that actually look like they relate. You know, and then I realize that I'm working in a continuum, and that everything is actually interrelated in some way, but I can't really tell you how. But you might discover it. Seriously, you might. Do you feel like you've had your fill?
Very interesting. What is the blue on that?
The
Is that
blue.
fish line?
This is fishing rope. You know when you walk on the beach and you find that woven fishing rope? It's plastic. It's very hard. So I took it apart and just made it into separate threads and then bunched it together. Yeah. Petey?
I'm just curious about where you think you might want to go from here, because your exploration is so vast that I wonder if there's any reflection on that.
Actually, when I mentioned that little bird that I'm piercing, it's funny. It's not funny, but it's interesting that even before this show went up and I was, finishing up this work, I have several things that I've collected that are objects that I have wanted to pierce with multiple holes, so that, and all in one direction, so that when you go by them, you'll just have like a flash through. I have a root that's absolutely fantastic that, is very intricate, and once again, Mark Goodenough is helping me figure out how to drill that thing so that I can just drill it with hundreds of holes. the bird, I've got another thing that looks almost like a leg, you know. So I'm working on the pierced pieces right now, and whether or not they'll have wire through the holes, you know, like is the wire going to show up? There's so many options, but that's my next thing that I'm interested in, plus all the collages that I have laid out that I'm working on still. We'll see. Yeah. Anybody else want to know anything?
Michelle, thank you so much.
Yes,